All right, so our goal for these sets of notes is to use Pythagorean theorem and simplifying radicals. Notice those are both from 8.1, so we're using 8.1 to discover and use properties of 30, 60, 90 triangles. So a triangle. All right, so find the missing side and leave your answer in simplest radical form. So we have two problems here. These are 8.1 review. Pythagorean theorem is what we're going to use. What does the Pythagorean theorem say? What's the Pythagorean theorem? What's our rule there? I could say a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but then I have to remember what's a, what's b, and what's c. That's the better way to say it. Leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. And if you write it like that, then you don't have to know what a, b, and c are. And if c is given as a leg and a is a hypotenuse, you don't have to worry about getting mixed up. It's leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So what I like to do is find my hypotenuse and circle it so I know which one is on the lonely side. So how do I find the hypotenuse? Where's the hypotenuse going to fall? The long side. How do I know which side's the long side, though? The opposite from the right angle, because the right angle is going to be the biggest angle. There's my hypotenuse. Here's my right angle. Here's my hypotenuse. So I like to circle my hypotenuse so I know, cool, that's the hypotenuse. The other two then are legs. Go ahead and solve for x and solve for y in those two triangles. All right, so looking at our setup, we solve, we simplify. For y, we should get 2 square roots of 13. For x, we add 5 square roots of 15. You guys seem to do pretty well with those two, which is good because you guys had your quiz on that the other day. Okay, give me a 1 to 5. I got that down. Maybe a 4 is I can get to the square root of 52, but I struggle from there. You know, maybe a 3 is like I can get my setup. Not really sure where to go from there. Where are we at? Okay. Cool, cool. All right, so we have this investigation. Okay. And a 30, 60, 90 triangle is what we're focusing on today. So we're going to have a 30-degree angle, a 60-degree angle, a 90-degree angle. Okay. So it is a right triangle. It's a special right triangle. It says to find this whole chart and leave all your answers in simplest radical form. So what kind of triangle is this? Equilateral, because all three sides are the same. If all three sides are the same, it also means it has to be equiangular. What are the three angles have to be in an equiangular or equilateral triangle? They're all 60 degrees. Okay, so if I have this is 60, this is 60, and this is 60, I'm going to show you then how we can break this up and show a 30, 60, 90 triangle from it. I'm going to erase this angle here at the top. So if I take a straight edge, and I cut that triangle so I could fold it in half, and since I can fold it in half, I'm creating those two angles to be the same, so they'll both be 90. I'm creating these two angles up at the top to be the same, so what do these two angles have to both be? 30 each. Right? And I took an equilateral triangle, and now I have two 30, 60, 90 triangles. Okay? Whoa, 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 what? What's that? Oh, it's cool? Okay, cool. All right, so let's see what we can do with this. They say that we have a short leg, a hypotenuse, and a long leg. Okay, so let's see if we can label them in this equilateral triangle here. Looking at only one of them, because we don't have to focus on both. Let's focus on one. So we'll focus on this one here on the right. So looking at this triangle here, we have our 30-degree angle, our 60-degree angle, our 90-degree angle. What side is going to be the short leg? Or, actually, let's do this one first. Which side's the hypotenuse? How do you know? It's across from the right angle. So if I go across from the right angle, I'm over here. So this here is your hypotenuse. So far, so good? Okay, that means that this side here is a leg and this side here is a leg. If this is not drawn to scale, how do I know which is going to be the short leg versus the long leg? And this is from a couple units ago, so let's see if you remember. Go ahead.
Which angle is
The angle that's the smallest is the 30, so across from that would be what? The smallest leg. So this has to be the short leg, which makes this one here the long leg. Are you with me? Okay, now that we have these labeled, let's actually take and say, okay, if I labeled this short leg a length of 1, so if this length is 1, what would this whole side be? If this short leg's 1, this whole side would have to be 2, right? Isn't the hypotenuse the same as this whole side? So if the short leg is 1, what's the length of the hypotenuse? 2. If I had the short leg be 2, what would the whole side be? 4. So what would the length of the hypotenuse be? 4. If I had my short leg be 3, what would the length of the hypotenuse be? See if you can figure out what the pattern is. If my short leg is 4, what's the hypotenuse? If my short leg is 5, what's the hypotenuse? If my short leg is 6, what's my hypotenuse? If my short leg is 10, what's my hypotenuse? If my short leg is A, what is my hypotenuse? 2 times A, which is 2A, or A times 2, right? That's how we would write it in math, with variables. Okay. Now the length of the long leg is a little bit tricky. What you're going to have to do is Pythagorean theorem. Okay? We know Pythagorean theorem is leg squared plus leg squared equals hypotenuse squared. So we're going to have to do our first setup here. Leg squared would be 1 squared plus, we'll call it x squared because we don't know, has to equal the hypotenuse squared, which would be 2 squared. Solve for x and simplify the radical. Put your answer here. Next, you're going to do it with 2 and 4. So 2 squared plus x squared equals 4 squared. Figure out the length of the longer leg and solve for the simplify the radical to solve for that longer leg. Okay, leave your answer in simplest radical form. Are we okay with that? So go ahead and do that now. All right, so if you follow this pattern for the first couple, like I did 1, 2, and 3 for the shorter leg, and I got the square root of 3, 2 square roots of 3, 3 square roots of 3, and I realized that I'm just taking this number and multiplying by the square root of 3 every time. So I was able to fill in the rest. So if the short leg was A, then I was able to come up with A square roots of 3. Okay? So both of these measurements here are based on the shorter leg. So if you have the short leg and you want to go to the hypotenuse, so if you have the short leg and you go to the hypotenuse, what operation are you doing from the short leg to the hypotenuse? Multiplying by 2. So from the short leg to the hypotenuse, you multiply by 2. Okay? This diagram right here, this is going to show up over and over again this unit. Okay? And eventually will be on your unit test at the end. So maybe like star this. It's going to be on some reviews. It's going to be on a unit test. On your cheat sheet, that would be a really good diagram to draw because it's rules. If I was going from the hypotenuse to the short leg, though, so if I'm going this direction, I'm going to multiply by 2. How do you undo multiplying by 2? What's the opposite of it? Dividing by 2. Okay. Also, from the short leg, from the A, we got to the length of the longer leg. So if I'm going from the short leg to this long leg, I think leg got cut off there, to the long leg, what operation are you doing from the short leg to the long leg? How do we go from 1 to the square root of 3, or 2 to 2 times the square root of 3, or from 3 to 3 times the square root of 3? Multiplying the short leg times the square root of 3. So you're taking that short leg and you're multiplying by the square root of 3. Okay. If we were to then go in the reverse direction, what would we get? Dividing by the square root of 3, because that's how we undo it. Okay. If you flip this over, we have some examples that we'll go through together using these rules. And let's draw that diagram up at the top, because that's what you're going to want to do on your assignment also. So if I draw my 30, 60, 90 triangle here, here's my short leg, long leg, and my hypotenuse. I'm going to label those sides. And maybe you just want to draw the rule in one direction. But from the short leg, that's what we need, and we can go in either of these directions. How do you go from the short leg to the hypotenuse? What operation do you do from the short leg to the hypotenuse? Multiplying by 2. Remember that short leg was half of that whole equilateral side, so the hypotenuse is double it. Okay. How do you go from the short leg to the long leg? You're multiplying by what? Square root of 3. Okay, so now that we have our rules there, we know the opposite way is just dividing. First thing you want to do is, these are not always drawn to scale. So, fill in your short leg, long leg, and hypotenuse. Here's a 90, here's a 30. What's this last angle have to be? Across from the right angle, what's this side right here? Hypotenuse. So I'm going to label that the H. Across from the 30, what's this side here? The shorter leg, because it's across from the smaller angle. Across from the 60 then is what? The long leg. Okay. What side do I want to start with here? What side do I really need? The short leg. Do I have it? Yes. Okay, so from the short leg to the hypotenuse, what do I do? So your work here is just to write times 2. That's how you can show your work on this problem. Okay, tell me the operation. So I'm taking 50 times 2. A is going to equal then what? 100. That's the work that I need to see. Is you have this, you multiplied by 2. Just tell me the operation that you're doing, just like we did in the shortcuts. Does that make sense? Once you have those two sides, okay, we have the 50, we have the 100, how do we get to the long leg? Go back to the short leg and multiply by the square root of 3. So we go to the from the short leg to the long leg. Our work is to multiply by the square root of 3. So what's 50 times the square root of 3? 50 square roots of 3. That's why on that radical practice, those were the operations you did. Multiply and divide by the square root of 3, multiply and divide by 2, and there was one other number that we worked with, which we'll do on the day 2 or notes number 2. Okay, but that problem's done. We found A and we found B. Ready for example 2? Okay. This one, let's go through and label. We have a 90, we have a 60. This side has to be the 30-degree angle. Okay. What is this 30 label? What is this side? Hypotenuse, so that's the H. What's the Y have to be? Short leg or long leg?
Short leg.
The short leg, it's across from the 30, so that's the short leg. Across from the 60, we have the long leg. What side do we always start with? The short leg, right? Both of them, the way we get to it is from that short leg. Do I have the short leg here? No, that means you have to get there first. So whatever you have, we're going to have to go to the short leg because we need that labeled before we can do anything else. You have the hypotenuse. We need to go to the short leg. So from the hypotenuse to the short leg, what's the operation going to be? Divide by 2. So we're going to write that in. If our hypotenuse is 30, what's 30 divided by 2? 15. If that was a fraction, we would write it 30 over 2. If we cannot reduce it, we leave it 30 over 2. Like if it was 31, we would leave it 31 over 2. Because we don't write these as decimals. Okay, we leave everything exact for special right triangles. So far, so good? All right. Now that we have the short leg, we can then go to the long leg. How do we go from the short leg to the long leg? Times by the square root of 3. So from the short leg to the long leg, we multiply by the square root of 3. What is 15 times the square root of 3? There's your 3 lengths. So far, so good? All right, we ready for that last example?
Yeah.
All right, so given the long leg, all right, let's label. Here's the 90, here's the 60. This side then has to be the 30. Okay. They told you they gave you the long leg, so I'm hoping that this is the long leg, right? It's across from the 60. That's your long leg. What does B have to be? Hypotenuse. It's across from the right angle. And what's A have to be? The short leg, because it's across from the 30. Okay. What side do we always start with? Are we given the short leg? So we have to get there. So we have to go from the long leg to the short leg. How do you go from the long leg to the short leg? Long leg to short leg, we're going to divide by the square root of 3. Okay. 5 square roots of 3 divided by the square root of 3. You can write it. How do you simplify this? These are going to cancel. What's A have to be then? Okay. Sometimes you're going to have to write this and you're going to have to do some work to simplify it. Sometimes you will. Sometimes it's as easy as things just cross out. But that's why we practice all those radical operations, because sometimes you're going to have to take what you're given and simplify it. Okay? Like if that was not perfectly canceled, then you'd have a square root in the denominator, and you'd have to multiply by the undercover 1. Okay? All right, how do I go from the short leg then to the hypotenuse? Multiply by 2. So what's 5 times 2? So B is 10 here. And there was very little work to show. Our showing of our work is putting the arrows in and telling me the operation that you're doing. Okay. Now some of them, like for example, if we had, let me draw one more example here because I want to show you what would happen. If I had my long leg, so let's say this is 60, 30, 90. If I gave you a long leg of 10, okay, this is your long leg, this is your short leg, this is your hypotenuse. How do you go from the long leg to the short leg? Because you always need your short leg first. How do you go from the long leg to the short leg? Divide by the square root of 3. What is 10 divided by the square root of 3? You're not going to be able to do that without showing any work. So we have to write it out. 10 over the square root of 3. Can I leave that as my answer? No. That's why we simplified radicals. That's why we've been practicing this so much. So how do we go to simplifying this? Multiply by the undercover 1. What version of the undercover 1 are you going to use? Square root of 3 over the square root of 3. That version is 1. So when you multiply by 1, you're not changing the value. On top, you'll have 10 square roots of 3. On the bottom, oh my goodness. On the bottom, what do you have?
3.
We're going to have the square root of 9, which is 3. Can 10 square roots of 3 over 3 simplify it all? No, that's done. So this is your answer for the short leg. Okay. Then how do you go from the short leg to the hypotenuse? What's our operation? Multiply by 2. So if we have 10 square roots of 3 over 3 times 2, what do we end up with? Yes, 20 square roots of 3 over 3. And that would be your answer to the hypotenuse. Okay. But sometimes you have a little bit more than just doing things in your head. You'll have to show me your evidence on simplifying those radicals, depending on the numbers that you're given. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you flip the page, not to the next set of notes, but to where it says the 8.2 assignment, numbers 1 through 15 are all 30, 60, 90 triangles. Okay? So I showed you how to show your work by writing in arrows. So you guys can get started on this assignment.